It's been 4 years since I moved into this workshop, and the layout of machines and workbenches has pretty much remained unchanged throughout all of that time. And there's a lot that I love about this layout, but I still have a long list of alterations that I want to make and things that I want to rectify. One of the most important things for any good workshop layout is dust extraction. The main issue I have with my current setup is with my HVLP extractor. Whenever I power it on, I get plumes of dust emanating from the top of the bag, which are then airborne, meaning I breathe them into my lungs, which is not good. And that's really frustrating, particularly because I spent extra money on getting the cartridge filter for this extractor, which was an optional upgrade, and I did that specifically because I didn't want fine dust particles exhausted from the machine into the air. I do have a ceiling mounted air filter, which obviously helps reduce some of the airborne dust, but I'd prefer if that dust wasn't exhausted from the machine in the first place. My first idea to try and rectify this issue was to add some sticky foam tape around the perimeter of the drum in the hope that it would help seal it up more. But as you can see, that made little to no difference. My ideal option would be to have the extractor externally to the workshop. I actually did something similar years ago when I was in a shed, and that worked great, but that's just not practical here. I wondered if I might just be able to replace the bag with some sort of container underneath, and when I removed the bag and measured up, it measured 370 millimeters, and I wondered if that would be quite similar in size to the barrel that I use for my cyclone. So I thought I'd measure that up, and it measured 370 millimeters too. The trouble was it was slightly too tall to fit on top of the wheelbase, so I dismantled it and it looked good, but I found it really difficult to get it secured. So I ended up turning the extractor upside down, and that's where I found that, to my surprise, it fitted on there perfectly. It's one of the best feelings when things just fit together like this, as it so often isn't the case. So I thought I'd struck gold with this solution. That was until I powered on the extractor and saw just as much dust come out as before with the bag. So it was back to the drawing board. Another option for containing the dust would be to build a large cabinet. Enclosing the HVLP extractor within a cabinet would also help reduce the noise level, and it will solve another layout problem in my workshop layout too. So I'm going to give it a try and we'll see what happens. I'm going to start by building a side panel using some 9mm MDF and some random scraps of pine to frame it out. I can then start removing everything from the corner where I want to build the cabinet. The idea is to make this cabinet completely airtight so that I don't have dust exhausted from it, and that's not going to be as straightforward as it sounds, for reasons I'll explain later in the video. As my barrel idea didn't work, I'm going to go back to using bags for 3 reasons. 1, I already have bags. 2, they are transparent so I can see when they need emptying. And 3, I don't have to buy another barrel. I took the wheels off the base of the extractor as they won't be needed. Also, I can probably use them for something else. I'm adding some upright pieces at the front, as I can utilise the front panel for some extra functionality which I'll be adding later in the video, and these will also help support the considerable weight that will be sitting on top of this cabinet. Obviously I'm going to need regular access to the bag on the extractor, so I'm adding a noggin here to frame out what will be a service hatch in the middle at the bottom. Here I'm cutting my top shelf, and one of the disadvantages of moving around all your dust extraction equipment is that you can't use your dust extractors anymore, but fortunately I have a cordless one which I could hook up to cut this piece of veneered MDF. Our local DIY store often has offcuts of this in the scrap bin in exchange for a charitable donation, and that's where I got all of the MDF that I'm going to be using on this project. So on this top shelf I can place my vacuum extractor and cyclone so that all my dust extraction for the workshop is contained within this one small space in the corner. Before I could finish the cabinet I had to wait for some parts that I had ordered to arrive, so in the meantime I can work on the ducting for the vacuum extractor, which I'm aiming to simplify with this new setup. Shorter pipe runs and less bends should make for improved airflow. Oh, what a feeling! I'm just vacuuming the ceiling. I'm also going to need some new blast gates. I have a video about how I make these already, so I'll leave a link to that in the description box, but basically these will enable me to select which ducting I want my extractors to suck from. and I get the pipe secured to them with hot glue, a method which has worked really well for me over the years. It sets really quickly and provides an airtight seal. The ducting for the vacuum extractor and cyclone is made up of 68mm PVC downpipe, and all of the joints are sealed with rubber inner tube. Again, I have another video all about this, which I'll leave a link to in the description box. And for the HVLP extractor, I'm using some 100mm PVC pipe, which is designed for heating and ventilation systems. I had to order some more components for what I want to set up here, and I'd love it if you could have a guess how expensive this was, because it blew my mind a bit. So write down in the comments what you think this lot cost, and I'll reveal it later in the video. No cheating please. So there's two 2-meter lengths of pipe and a few fittings. I picked up some of these pipe clips from Screwfix, which are actually for 110mm drainage pipes, but they are bendy, so they'll work fine for 100mm pipe. And I want to make up a short section of ducting to live inside my cabinet, which will be fitted to the HVLP extractor, and I'm using foil tape to join it all together. The easy option here would have been to use flexible tube, but that's much less efficient in terms of airflow, so I wanted to minimise the amount of that stuff that I used as much as possible. And I ended up with this thing of beauty. It's a bit of a tight squeeze, and at this point I realised I probably should have made my cabinet a little bit deeper, but I managed to get it in there. I probably should have bought a 100mm hole saw for this project. It would have saved me a lot of time, but I got the job done with the jigsaw and some filing. And I made some more blast gates, but this time for the 100mm pipe. I used duct tape to keep everything sealed. Here I'm making the front panel out of some 6mm ply, and I'm going to cut the opening, which will be the service hatch. And this is going to need some holes cut in it for pipes too. At this point I can connect up my internal ductwork to the parts that are outside the cabinet and get the blast gates added. I'm going to secure the front panel with screws, no glue, as I may have to get in here again in future. I ordered these toggle clamps for fitting the service door so that I can get a nice airtight seal. The smaller parts I can get secured to some battens, which I can secure around the opening. And then I made this door from some MDF and battens. And I have a piece of perspex which I can use to make a window. This is so that I can see inside to know when the bag needs emptying. I used hot glue here again to fit it. And I ran another bead around the edge again just to make sure everything was airtight. I went through a lot of hot glue sticks on this project, as you can imagine. Then I can get the toggles added to the side of the door and add some of this draft seal foam tape around the back edge of the door. I had more of this than I needed, so I ended up doubling it up. These toggle clamps are adjustable so that you can set the tension just as tight as you need it. Okay, so that's about as far as I can get without talking about something very important, which is movement of air. At the moment, as the cabinet isn't completely sealed up, when I have the cabinet door on and the extractor turned on too, there are air leaks at the bottom here and at the top. Now, the way these HVLP extractors work is that as air gets sucked up from the tool, it enters the extractor, it travels up into the filter, and then it gets exhausted through the filters as clean, breathable air. By putting the extractor inside a sealed box, that air now no longer has anywhere to go, so the air in the box becomes pressurized, and if the air has nowhere to go, then the extractor is going to struggle sucking in air at the source, which is the tool. So in other words, the airflow is compromised and the suction isn't as good. So I need to allow air to escape from the sealed box, but what I don't want is for that air to be carrying all the fine dust that gets exhausted from the bag that I showed in the intro, as that would obviously render this whole project completely pointless. One solution to this would be to exhaust to the exterior of the workshop by running a pipe through the wall, but there are a couple of reasons why I'm not going to do that. First is heat loss. Warm air inside the workshop is going to get sucked into the extractor. It's then going to get exhausted outside, and that air is then going to get replaced with cold air from outside, which would come in via the trickle vents in my windows. It's completely unheated in here, by the way, although I do occasionally bring in an oil-filled radiator. The second reason is that exhausting air that is possibly full of fine dust particles outside isn't very kind to my neighbours or anyone else that happens to be walking by. In all honesty, I could probably easily get away with it just by pointing the pipe down towards the ground. Alternatively, I could duct that air up through the ceiling and through the roof, and then put a mushroom vent on top just to stop the rain getting in, but still it doesn't feel like the responsible thing to do. So instead, I'm going to exhaust the air back into the workshop, but I'm going to use a filter to prevent any of those dust particles becoming airborne. So I've bought a new filter. This is one of the ones that is compatible with my air filter. By adding this extra layer of filtration, I should hopefully resolve all of the issues. So I cut out an opening with the multi-tool a little smaller than the filter itself, as I wanted about 12mm around the perimeter so that air cannot escape without going through the filter fabric. I could then frame around the filter with more battens. Next, I'm going to fit some panels that I made up to fit around this pipe at the bottom to create a floor sweep, somewhere I can brush dust to get it picked up by the extractor. The hole in the top is to allow the blast gate to open and close, and I'll try this out later in the video. Right, with all that done, now I just need to make this thing look like it fits in with the rest of the workshop. So a coat of primer and a coat of paint. The filter shows the direction of airflow, so I know which way to fit it, and it's a nice snug fit. I've got some random metal plates here that I'm going to use to strengthen the floor sweep. Because it's on the floor, I was worried about it getting accidentally kicked or hit. And I'm not too worried about how this looks. This project is about function over aesthetics. When I tried out the floor sweep earlier, it sucked up pretty good, but it looked like it needed a small 45-degree piece in the corner to prevent air getting stuck there. So I added that. And now it works great. And finally, I can seal up any gaps using some silicone. One of the first things I want to check is whether I will have any issues with overheating. So yesterday I stuck a thermometer in there, and looking at that now, I can see the temperature is 16 degrees. So I'm going to open up one of the blast gates, doesn't really matter which one. And now I can power on the extractor. I'll leave this on now for like 20 minutes or so, and then I'll check the temperature again to see if there's an issue. Right, I lost track of time a bit. It's been 24 minutes and the temperature is now reading, I think that's 17, maybe 18 degrees. I'm just going to power it off and I'm just going to have a feel inside. Very slightly warmer than the temperature outside. I can just about feel a difference, but it's nothing that I'm concerned about, so that's good. It's probably worth mentioning here that my extractor is rated for up to 8 hours use. Some of the cheaper models are only rated for up to 2 hours use, so I'm not sure whether those ones would be okay in a cabinet like this. I expect those ones might be more likely to overheat. I just thought I'd mention this in case anyone is looking to do a similar project. Just going to quickly answer a few questions that I'm expecting I might get. The first is, how do I clean the filter for the extractor? And I can just about reach the handles on the inside. In the past, I've actually used an air gun to clean the filter rather than using the paddles, because over time that paddle can damage the filter, and I can still do that because I have just enough space to get in here with the air gun. It's not ideal, but I wanted this to be as compact as possible. How am I going to get the extractor out? Well, I'm hoping I won't have to, but I've kind of built it in a way that if I have to get it out at some point, perhaps if it needed repair or something like that, for example, the front panel simply unscrews and I would just need to redo some of the duct work, which would be a pain, but as I say, I'm hoping I won't need to for many, many years. How much did the 100mm PVC ducting cost in total? £70.58, which to me just seems incredibly expensive, but it's the cheapest I could find. Finally, a quick tour of the setup that I've got at the moment. So obviously the HVLP extractor is inside here, and I've got 3 outlets. This one over here with the blast gate goes over to the table saw. I've got a short piece of flexi pipe on there leading to the cabinet. That just enables me to move the table saw should I need to make certain cuts. I've also elevated the pipe a little bit. The second outlet is obviously for the floor sweep, which you've seen already. And the third outlet is over here. And this is for a new machine. so I'll have a pipe running along this wall, but I'll have more on that in an upcoming video. I've also significantly simplified the duct run for my vacuum extractor. So I've got this pipe run over here, which goes to my vacuum hose. This is the one that I use for my sanders and hand operated power tools. And obviously this one has a blast gate up here. This one up here serves the crown guard on my table saw. So basically whenever I use the table saw, I have the HVLP extractor sucking from the cabinet and the vacuum extractor sucking from the blade guard. It also means this flexi pipe is up and out of the way when I'm making cuts at the table saw, which is nice. And then the third inlet is this blast gate here, which if I turn on will go down to these two flexi pipes, which will both be hooked up to my belt and disc sander. Obviously I'm moving things around in the workshop at the moment, so everything's kind of everywhere, but this project was kind of the first hurdle in getting everything where I want it. So stay tuned for the next part coming soon. Thanks for watching.